Hello and welcome to Prism and Company. On the docket today is a cool game called Weave. Now, Weave is not a tarot deck, it is not oracle cards, it's not any of those things. It's designed as a role-playing game, very similar to something like Dungeons and Dragons, if you're familiar. If you happen to not be, it is a game where players embody characters. They take on a role, essentially. Maybe they are a strong but difficult brute, or a crafty, dexterous assassin, or something. The typical flow of a game like Dungeons and Dragons involves a lot of rules and a lot of time kind of crafting your character or your world. Weave takes care of all that for you. Weave is a card game that is also app-enabled, and it helps you build characters and worlds, and it's super fun. This video, though, is not a review of the game Weave. It's more diving into the cards themselves. You'll kind of see what I mean as soon as we get started, but Weave has some very cool correlations with tarot, but also feels very interesting and kind of otherworldly. It's almost as if our universe had a parallel dimension right next to it, and our universe has a tarot deck, this universe has Weave, so we kind of get to see what might have been if the archetypes were slightly different. Without further ado, let's dive right in. One element of this game that is not tarot related but is just oh so juicy are these amazing custom dice. Now, if you know me at all, you just know that I absolutely love dice. And here you can see a hint at the 4 different elements that show up. We have fire, water, wind, and earth. Now, if you are a tarot person, I think your ears are probably perking up already. There's also the Weave symbol and a big X. Now, these are used to overcome challenges. I won't go into that, but they are absolutely stunning, and I did want to call them out because they are totally beautiful. Weave is primarily made up of a deck of cards broken up into 2 different sections. We have the story cards and the challenge cards, differentiated by white and black. Now, there are 22 story cards and 56 challenge cards. If you are a tarot person at all, I'm sure your ears are tingling because that's a tarot deck right there. We have the major arcana and the minor arcana. And especially over here, this is where we'll spend the meat of our time, we have this beautiful set of almost like alternate universe tarot cards, as if the current set didn't exist. But let's take a look at the challenge cards first. They're actually pretty darn simple. They are broken up into the 4 suits, which are brooks, gales, flames, and stones. Stones, yes. And you can see it's just the symbol off the dice and a challenge rating. So it's not 1 through 10 like a normal deck. There are no court cards in this. It's just these challenges. They look totally stunning, though. I think this color on black is a beautiful, beautiful look. I'm just going to lay a few out here because why the heck not? Again, I won't go much into how to play the game, but all of the suits, I guess, have their own sort of associations, and they're pretty different from what normal tarot are. So, for example, stones are kind of like physical bodily challenges, so that's not all that much different than, say, what pentacles might be. Gales are challenges of skill or dexterity, so if you have to move a lot. Brooks are charisma challenges, so if you have to talk your way out of something, or maybe, what's the word I'm looking for here? Boast or intimidate, that's what you'd be doing there. And then flames are challenges of the mind, so if you have to gather information or think, that's what you'd be doing. So kind of an interesting, different take on what tarot is, and I actually really appreciate that too, because not everything always needs to be the same. But on to the main course, we have the story cards. Now, the story cards are really why I wanted to talk about this deck today. Kind of a cool fun fact about playing, if you use your favorite technology rectangle with the Weave app, you can scan them in and it helps you tell the story. It helps you build characters and settings and items and all these cool things. But again, not about the gameplay, all about the cards today. He says as he has yet to really talk about the cards. I want to spend a moment here on the back of the deck because these colors are really important. They relate to those suits that we saw earlier. So we have purple for gales, kind of warm, fiery tones for flames. Brooks are these blues, and stones are the browns. But this is pretty much the whole palette for the whole game. There's no greens. There's no... Why am I not thinking of any other colors? Pinks, let's say. It's this very limited color palette, which helps give it a real sense of style and cohesion. Kind of a neat little thing as well. This is like almost an alternate universe tarot deck because none of the cards are named the same and none of them are in kind of the order that you would expect, but it still feels very tarot-like. The Easter egg, though, is that the deck starts with a card called the Dawn and ends with a card called the Dusk. And in the tarot deck that I'm making, the Prism Tarot, I've reordered the trumps, which I'll explain in another video for many, many reasons. But my deck starts with the sun and ends with the moon. So I feel like me and Weave, we're like this. It's great, super cool. Let's take a look. Actually, we'll start with the Dawn since it's right there. Let's take a look at these cards one by one. The Dawn being our card 0 is so cool because it's dawning. It's the beginning of a new story. And it even has some ties to the Fool card. You know, we have this mountain, we have all this sky in the background, and that idea of kind of jumping off the cliff. There are many little things woven into this deck that make me believe that the creators were really either familiar with tarot or did a lot of research because it's very kind of cheeky in the way that it references things. And I think that's so cool. You can also see the number down here in the corner. It's very, very light, just light enough that you can put them in order if you want, but the real focus is on the cards themselves. Now, this graphic style, almost this vectorized style, is mostly, I think, for the app itself, being able to scan the cards and having them be very iconic and easy to grasp by the technology, but it also gives a real life and flavor to the deck. It feels like a cohesive set because all the cards are this simple in the way that they're presented. And I don't use simple in any sort of demeaning term. This is stunning, and it's really, really intelligently composed as well. Even little things like the white bleeding in from the edge here, kind of breaking this boundary, that's so cool and smart, especially for the 0 card where, you know, some of the border is literally leaking in, almost like the card has not yet formed. There are some decisions that were made that I really like as well. For example, there's no shading in any of these portions. They're just flat colors. I think that's really strong and striking. Now, there are some optical illusions of shading. For example, these 2 middle bars here, they look like they're lighter on this side and darker on this side, but that is totally a trick of the eye because these are next to darker and lighter colors respectively. This blue will naturally look darker here and it will naturally look lighter next to that. So even though it almost looks like there's a gradient of color on that strip of blue, it's actually the same all the way across. You can actually see it a little bit in this card here too. I think that's really cool. It's almost like this natural shading that's built in without having to do a lot of extra work. And it's letting your eye really kind of get lost, magic eye poster in these cards. Such a beautiful card, such a cool way to start. So let's move on from the Dawn or the Fool into the Magician, or in this deck, the Stag. Now there is a really powerful earthy theme in this set of cards, a lot of nature. There are certainly some people too, but it feels like this world is very much in the natural setting. There's lots of trees, there's lots of animals. This Stag, though, looks almost old. He's got like a gray goatee on the bottom. And just with how focused and centralized he is in the image, it makes him look powerful and strong and maybe even wise in some ways, which I think is really cool. Again, we can see the minimal color palette here, and we have all 4 of the suits. We have the flames, we have the stones, the gales. Oh, I'm sorry, the gales are the purple, and the brooks, which again is a nice little nod to the Magician card from a tarot deck, which is typically depicted with all 4 of the minor arcana symbols. So the wands, the swords, why am I blanking on this? The pentacles and the cups. Those are all the things that I talk about all the time. I think this is cool though, that instead of a powerful human, it's this really powerful animal. And again, just stunning. I love that the antlers also feed into the border here. Not every card does that with white, but a couple of these starting cards do, and it's really, really powerful. Even little decisions like the ears looping up just so they meet the edge of the card in kind of a perfect, what's the word I'm looking for here? Words are not coming to me today. We're just going to roll with it though. exponential curve. That's what I'm looking for. It's like those graphs that, always approach zero but never quite get there. I'm getting a real vibe of that just from the ears. But there are some items that collide into the edge of the card, like, again, the antlers, the sides of the deer, and the trees in the background. Beautiful composition, really pulling your eye in towards this little triangle on the forehead. If this were a divinatory deck of cards, I'd probably really key in on that, diamond, as a very important key piece of this composition of this card. I'm sure that would have some sort of Golden Dawn style spiritual meaning to it. So cool, so neat. Let's take a look at another card. Card number 2 in this deck is the Owl, which is the High Priestess in a normal tarot deck. And what a beautiful, again, little winking nod towards an actual deck, but without really referencing it at all. Another thing I like is that this is the first time the color white is completely enclosed within the card. It's not touching the borders, just like the High Priestess is kind of mysterious and withheld and, might not give you all the information right away. Again, just these juicy little tidbits that make me think that these deck creators really knew their tarot stuff, or at least knew enough about the symbolism to bake some things in. Here we also see a limited color palette in the card. So we have none of the blues from the brooks of this deck. We just have flames, stones, and gales. Super cool. And also a really interesting compositional choice with the wings of the owl pointing up, being very stylized. And I think what's a mountain in the background pointing down. Every time I look at this card, I always think of an owl-butterfly combo because it almost looks like there are two sets of wings, or as if we're kind of seeing the motion of the wings flapping up and down. And it's vague and it's cool. And I think good symbolism leaves a little bit of space for the mind to kind of explore and ebb and flow in and out. It doesn't always have to be this perfectly set in stone thing. There are some very smart compositional choices made here too. Things like so much symmetry happening in the owl, but a lot of asymmetry happening in the background. This circle is symmetrical in the center, for example, but we have lines on the top and lines on the bottom that don't cross over the other way. Super smart choices, but those are balanced out with the sphere down here, whether that's a crystal ball or a celestial sphere. The lines go in the opposite way. So again, kind of implied balance in there. Very cool, very smart decisions, and a beautiful take on card number 2. Here we come to card number 3, the Serpent, and it's just like a serpent not wanting to stay still. This is the first real deviation from a typical tarot deck, and I cannot express enough how much I appreciate that. If this was just a tarot deck kind of remade for game purposes, it would have been cool. I honestly probably would have liked it a lot, but this is something different. This makes me feel like I'm living in a different universe where the tarot deck developed in a different way. But even though this isn't the Empress, the Serpent feels like it would fit in the tarot deck just fine. It's got that kind of vaguely religious connotation to it. Actually, not all that vague. It's fairly strong Christian imagery, but it's also related to maybe like Kundalini energy or any of the serpents that you would see as an Ouroboros in alchemical symbolism. There is so much symbolism and meaning packed into the idea of the serpent that it fits right in with this kind of esoteric card divinatory goodness. As far as the composition goes, it's pretty straightforward. We have a lot of lines kind of leading in this way, heavy on the flames side of things, so really leading into that fire energy. Kind of cool that the background of the owl is opposite of the serpent. So these two cards almost lead into each other like it's some sort of funnel or settling point, like there might be some sort of wisdom or knowledge with the meeting of these two cards, potentially in this alternate universe tarot deck. So cool. I also like that the serpent almost looks like it's made of the night sky. Oh boy, I'm going to stop doing this in a moment, but I'm going to keep bringing other cards in. Actually, maybe I won't stop doing it. I think it's cool to see things side by side. I'm from the Midwest, if you couldn't tell, and it is genetically programmed into my body to apologize for every little thing. So you'll just have to roll with me. But we have little dots in this serpent that really kind of mirror the stars over here. They're a slightly different shape, but I really get kind of a starry night vibe. So if I was reading the serpent card, I could either read it as an animal or maybe some sort of celestial entity or some sort of vision. And how freaking cool is that? especially given that flames are the intellectual suit of this deck. The idea that the serpent is something that comes to the mind or is maybe born from the mind or fuels the mind, it almost looks like it's breathing fire, is a very, very neat idea indeed. But let's go on to the next. Following the serpent, we have the tortoise, a neat little kind of yin and yang kind of. We have fire and then we have water. The tortoise actually does feel a little bit like the emperor from tarot. It's very solid and protected, very sort of, forward moving and directional, but you don't get any of the kind of structure and strength that you get from the emperor typically. It's much more natural, obviously, and a lot more focused on just the animal itself, even in its environment, like the water behind it. A very cool, striking, stylistic card, very symmetrical in the background, unlike the previous ones that we've seen, which have been very asymmetrical in the background. And even though the actual tortoise itself is symmetrical on both sides, obviously we have a light side and a dark side, which follows even with things like the face over here. So there is a little bit of asymmetry, breaking things up, making the card a little bit more interesting. And actually, I've kind of been doing this so far, but I'm going to start maybe reading a little bit into these cards as if they were, new tarot cards. I might say that this is a card about going with the flow, but that there is a light and a dark side to going with the flow. It's very good. It's very mindful to just kind of let things go and let things pass you by. But it can also be kind of lazy or passive to just go with the flow and maybe not fight against something that is oppressive. Ooh, I like this. I'm going to maybe even do a spread at the end and give you the guys like a Weave tarot reading. I think that could be cool. Not a whole lot to say, although I do like this card a lot. I think it's really striking. And again, breaking the mold from a traditional tarot deck while still kind of keeping a little bit to the roots. I think it's quite successful. Coming in at number 5, we have the Mountain. Now, the Mountain, number 5 in the tarot deck is the Hierophant. And you could actually read that a little bit into the mountain. Like you have to go to the mountain to meet some sort of guru or monk or something. But here it's way more focused on the actual mountain itself and not on any specific person. A very limited color palette here. We just have bricks and stones, and I think that's great. Having some cards have the full palette of colors, some cards having just a couple. We'll even see some cards down the line, I think, that only have one. Maybe. We'll take a look. Either way, though, I think this blue and brown is a very, very cool combination. I love the idea of this water kind of coming from within this mountain, as if there's, like, how would that even work? There's like a lake or something in there, or maybe a spring coming up from the mountain itself. I think my divinatory interpretation of the mountain is don't expect solid things to be as solid as they seem. If you think someone is steadfast in their ideas, there might be this wealth of, nuance bursting from within them, just waiting to spill out. You just have to find the entrance to the cave to kind of get past that tough exterior and break down those walls. I think it's so cool. I think this really speaks to how tarot or oracle decks work. You kind of read into the images a little bit. I think you could actually very successfully use this deck as an oracle deck if you wanted to, just because the pictures are so striking, the words are so not universal, but approachable. There are a couple of them that get a little bit tougher towards the end if you were maybe using this for divination, but I think it's quite cool. And this is a really, really striking and powerful image. And again, I just love that this is not focused on a person or an animal. It's focused on terrain. A lovely addition to our otherworldly tarot set. The storm. It comes in furious as the night. All right, enough of that. This is the card I was thinking of when I thought of the single color palette card, but there actually is a little bit of brown here on the bottom. Now, this one totally deviates from our typical tarot deck. Again, totally love that. Here we have number 6, which is traditionally the Lover's card. But now we have the Storm, and we have this downward facing triangle that kind of speaks to maybe a tornado or some sort of thunderhead crashing down. but it's within the context of all this extra purple and all this extra dark. So it feels like a storm. It also feels a little bit otherworldly, a little bit odd, and just as itself, it feels like a symbol. I think if we were looking at the storm as a card to be read, because I'm totally loving this now, I would say that storms feel dangerous and violent, but there is shape and structure to them. So how can you find something in your life that is seemingly chaotic or maybe disruptive and look back, take a step back a little bit and see where the structure might lie within it? I think that'd be kind of a cool interpretation for the storm card. Again, we're seeing these kind of patterns forming. So we had kind of the fire and water with the serpent and the tortoise. Here we have very earthy and very airy with the mountain and the storm. Lots of cool little back and forths. Again, things that you would expect to see in a tarot deck. Plenty of thought put into the actual structure of these cards and how they're organized. The storm is also pretty cool in my opinion because of the very dark palette in the background. It really focuses your eye and brings it forward to these small little lines running through the composition, to the actual shape of the tornado itself. It helps propel that forward as if the storm is chasing after you or coming at you fast, and helps push the background even further back into the page. Very successful as an image, such a cool idea of another style of tarot card. And even though it's not related to the Lovers, again, I'm kind of loving that. I say let's take a look at the next one and see where it takes us. The Inferno, coming in hot. Boy, these do not want to stay still today. Number 7 in the tarot is the Chariot, and here we have the Inferno, but we still have kind of an idea of movement or burning. In this case, the fire is kind of rising. We have these arrows almost pointing, but it's not holding itself too true. I think the Inferno is a really cool take on the idea of a straight fire card, because if this card was called the Fire, I would almost think warming or, cooking food or healing. The idea of just straight fire feels very different than Inferno. Inferno to me feels consuming and overtaking and almost dangerous in some ways. Although the image doesn't necessarily look dangerous. We can see almost a built fire on the bottom here. We can see flames moving up, but it doesn't look totally uncontrolled. There's a very cool ebb and flow to this card. It seems to want to give and take mostly from the image to the name. There's like kind of a dissonance there. Obviously they fit thematically together, but something about it feels a little bit off. And I think that's going to feed into my new divinatory meaning of this card, where we're looking at something that seems really dangerous, but actually isn't. It's just putting on a front. And I think that could really be kind of a neat way to sort of interpret and experience this card. Ooh, we've gotten so bright, burning like an inferno. Again, we have beautiful natural light today with clouds coming by, so we're just going to let the light pour in. I think it's beautiful. Oh, there is something kind of gorgeous about all this white with, boom, the Inferno in the center. From a compositional standpoint, again, we have a very symmetrical background with a very symmetrically composed flame in the center, but one that's not afraid to kind of bend off in different directions and give us all these cool little pockets in the center. This is also the shape, directly the shape that was used with stars in the Dawn card, for example. So there might be some sort of cosmic implications of the Inferno as well. Maybe this is a constellation in this deck that means something. Maybe this is the constellation of the Serpent. I can kind of see it winding there. And this is the fire that fuels that Serpent card. Oh, all sorts of cool little goodness that we could potentially read in. Let's take a look at the next. Coming in on the heels of the Inferno is the River. We've gone from this very powerful, almost destructive force to this more kind of healing force. Rivers bring life. Rivers carry things and, help us move. I also love that there is a rock in the center of the river here. Rivers are great, but they're not without their obstacles. We also have some hints to other things that we've seen in cards, like these trees back here. Also, our sun has finally risen from the dawn to almost a noon place. Now, number 8 in the tarot is either strength or justice, depending on kind of which flavor of tarot deck you take. And we've abandoned that nearly completely here. I could maybe think of some correlation, but again, we're kind of going our own way. We're diving a little bit more into the natural. And it's kind of neat. Our next card up totally takes us away from the natural. And I think that's a cool juxtaposition here of having something so natural next to something so not. Compositionally speaking, we have almost this hourglass shape, which I guess could speak to justice, maybe the idea of scales perhaps, or time or something like that. But more importantly, it is a very symmetrical top with a very asymmetrical bottom. So even though the card left to right feels pretty balanced, top to bottom it feels a little bit off. It gives this river so much more movement down here because symmetry tends to feel more stable. We feel a little bit of that instability with the trees here as well, although they are still balanced in many ways because these trees are slightly larger and these 3 trees are slightly smaller, so it feels like there's some mass is probably equivalent. I think from a divinatory purpose, I'm probably going to focus in, I'm so torn. Part of me wants to say the sun is the most important thing in the river card, which now that I'm saying that feels ridiculous, but our dawning has finally kind of risen and whatever was put in motion at the beginning is finally moving now. But I think focusing on the river is probably more appropriate. So I'd say, as you move down your path, here we go. As you move down your path, as you feel like your idea or what you're doing is feeling more realized, beware of obstacles. Momentum brings not entropy. Boy, it's been a long time since I've taken physics. Inertia. Momentum brings inertia, and if you hit something like a rock, boy, you're just crashing. Your boat is going to get destroyed. Lots of little cautionary messages I'm feeling in the river here. And with that, I say the river rolls on down, and we'll look at the next card. We're going to hit a string of very kind of man-made artifacts almost, and there's a cool reason for that, which I'll show you towards the end of the video. But up next, we have the crown. This is card number 9 here. And card number 9 in a traditional tarot deck is the Hermit. Now, there are many cards in this set that feel very hermity to me, but they are later on down the line. So now we're kind of referencing other tarot cards, but putting them in different places. I think that's pretty cool. The crown is, I'm trying to think, not reminding me of any specific tarot card, even kind of from like an archetypal or energy standpoint. But it is cool. It feels like it fits right in. Maybe the Emperor or something, the idea of power. And this is a really interesting depiction of a crown too. The actual crown itself is fairly straightforward. It looks very nice. It's full of jewels and looks very golden and maybe expensive. It also looks kind of prismatic in a way too. We have this light pouring in from the top here. And I'm also looking back at the river, and the river also had edges that bleed in too. So we're kind of getting back to that broken border, which is neat. But this light that bleeds in and almost looks like it's refracting down through the crown. Maybe it's hitting a crystal inside of it, and we're seeing some light pour out of the bottom. This could also be hair potentially. Maybe we're looking at either swooping hair over our young emo prince, or maybe hair on the back of somebody, or princess, to each their own. But I think it's kind of neat. I also love some little cool stylistic decisions like little bits of light that are reflecting off these crystals almost look dark compared to this brilliant white light that is being brought in. Another cool choice is the stark black background of this card. Black is used fairly sparingly in the deck, so when you see this much of it this suddenly, it's very striking. It's very interesting. The crown coming from the river feels almost dark and oppressive. This card is literally full of white light. The sun is pouring down over this very natural thing. And now we have just this little bit of light peeking in with this black, almost oppressive feeling kind of superimposed over the top of it. That being said, I don't feel like I'm going to read the crown as very oppressive in my kind of alternate history tarot interpretations. Part of me wants to focus on the prismatic nature of it. Let's do this. I'm going to say that the crown is interpreted as Something, power or structures often take unfiltered truth or reality, which can be hard to hear, and break it down into something a little bit more approachable. So this is a card speaking to the angsty in us. Oh man, 2 angsty references in the crown. I'm kind of loving it. For those of us who yearn for freedom or truth or just raw, unfiltered reality, realizing that that can be really intense and really hard to deal with, and that sometimes we need a filter in place, even if it's one that we don't like, to help us kind of process things. Now, take these interpretations for what you will. They are not, I'm just making them up. They're not part of the set or anything. And they're probably also all sorts of imbalanced or whatever, but it's super fun. So I hope you're enjoying. The coin is up next. Now this is kind of cool. It feels like a minor arcana card almost. This could be the Ace of Pentacles in some way. We have just one big coin coming in. And kind of a cool stylistic thing, looking at the crown over here, is the light pouring in from both sides. Also, I want to say, I did mean to mention, there is brown in the back of this card. I was looking through my viewfinder and the image was a little blown out, so I thought it was straight black, but there's a little bit of brown in there. That's what I get for not looking directly at the images. The coin is one of the more straightforward images in the deck. The background is fairly symmetrical. It's just light coming in. We have a little bit of asymmetry with the white shining down on the actual coin itself. And this guy is just broken in half with a light and a dark side, just to kind of reflect some of that light coming in. Here again, we have some of those stars or shine coming off the outside of it. Totally beautiful. Another limited color palette here. We have flames meeting brooks. So kind of a fire and water, elementally speaking, coming into the coin. From a divinatory purpose, I might ascribe the coin a little more mundanely, or might ascribe something to it. Maybe this is just talking about money coming your way. Maybe it's literally just some good luck. Card number 10 refers to the Wheel of Fortune in the tarot deck. And here we have a wheel in the center as well. So kind of another cool little nod. We've diverted quite a bit from a traditional tarot deck, and now we're circling our way back to a more direct reference, but still kind of keeping it fresh and new. I say we leave this one where it is. A neat little card, a neat little visual image, and a neat little nod to the to the traditional tarot deck. Here we have another man-made object, the Tome. And I will actually pop the coin back in here. Another very cool, almost reflective image of, things rising up from either side. We have watery colors and fiery colors. We also have those colors switching. So blues are now on the inside as opposed to the outside, and likewise with the flames on the outside there. Card number 11 either refers to strength or to justice, depending on which way you read tarot. This definitely does have kind of a justice-y feel to me, maybe like the Book of the Law with things in there. It also gives me kind of a Hierophant vibe in that there is like maybe a sacred text here. But, neither here nor there. The idea of the tome or the book of knowledge is shocking to me, seeing this card that it's not in a tarot deck. Doesn't that just feel like it should be in a tarot deck? I think it's cool. Visually speaking, it's pretty stunning, and there are some very interesting choices made, and I would love to know why. This in particular, this brick of dark red, I want to know so badly why they didn't carry the colors through. I think it's because this side of the book is all wrapped in dark red, and they also wanted the opposite side of the book to be wrapped in dark red. So just from kind of a visual perspective, making things a little bit more even on each side, they decided to color it in. Or it could be like light is shining into this book and getting captured almost. So there's a little bit of shadow behind it. Although this light does carry through, I just think it's a really interesting little choice. And also, why is there none of this color red kind of coming in here? It's almost like it's ramping up. There's just some odd things happening with the colors, but all those little things make this card more interesting to look at. It's not quite what you would expect. It's not quite even or maybe precise, but that is not what this deck is going for. Actually, in some ways, this reminds me a lot of the very beginning of the deck where we had the owl, and the owl having this mountain behind it that almost looks like a second set of wings. It's just this little oddity that makes you go like, huh, what exactly is happening there? And again, that's sort of perfect for something designed for divination or for, non just traditional depiction means. Now, our interpretation of the tome, or I suppose my interpretation of the tome, I'm going to say, hunting down knowledge, having to go and look for it. The idea that, we have all this fire in the background, which means the mind and intellect and knowledge in this set. The idea that there's all this knowledge out there, but we have to look to a source to actually find it. And I think that's super neat. Very beautiful depiction. I even love some of the small nods, like all of the words in this book are actually the symbol for Brooks. So there's kind of bringing in an emotional quality to this as well. Brooks also being the ribbon folding through the tome. Super cool card, very divergent from a tarot deck, but in a way that surprises me now that I see it. There are actually more cards in this deck where I'm just like, man, how did that not make it in? But just so cool to see. And I'm thankful that it has a different take. Masquerade, painted faces on parade. Masquerade. It's been a very sing-songy day. I love a good sing-songy day. The Mask is up next. Card number 12. Traditionally, the Hanged Man in the tarot deck. I'm almost getting like ribbon vibes from the back, like maybe something is hanging off of this, or maybe how a mask hangs off of somebody's face, but not a ton of correlation there. The Mask is an interesting idea for a tarot style card because masks are a very powerful image. The idea of covering up your identity or trying to be someone else or trying to disguise yourself. I think that's pretty cool. This is not my favorite image from the deck, although it's still very striking. Something about the more man-made cards don't feel as at home in this deck to me for some reason. I just love the natural ones like the Serpent or, some more that we'll see coming up. The river or the mountain come to mind too. All that being said, though, we still do have a very successful composition. It's almost optical illusion style, like constantly wrapping over itself. It gives you this great feeling of momentum and turning. I also love that those ribbons are shown seeing through the mask here, and that things like the edge of this purple ribbon would follow directly in line with the diamond of the eye on that mask. Super cool little smart compositional tricks that help carry your eye through in very, very smart ways, giving us this real X pulling our eye into the center of the composition. Totally cool. I also love that the strings of the mask are following along with the ribbons as well. Just more little smart decisions helping to unify and pull this card together. I'm actually going to look at the card here too. I'm almost certain that it's all black in the background. Again, we have this more kind of man-made card feeling very dark and oppressive in some ways, or maybe mysterious. And then all these ribbons, and then finally the mask in front. I think for our divinatory purposes, the mask will be disguising oneself, covering up something really reinforced by all that darkness in the background, and then all of this pomp and circumstance just behind the mask to kind of dazzle you and say, don't look at me, look at the stuff happening in the background, ta-da, da-da-da-da-da. I think it's appropriate that I started this card with a song because I feel like the idea of, song and dance comes to mind with the mask. Just beautiful. And from here, we kind of move on from our more man-made style cards to, again, a set of more kind of naturalistic ones. The next card up is actually my favorite, so let's take a look. The Woods. I actually have a really weird relationship with the woods in real life. I always associate the woods with alien abductions, and that is 100% from just watching too many alien conspiracy theory videos. It's odd, I know, but I see the woods and I immediately think, oh, there's probably aliens in there. So that speaks to some weird part of my psyche, I'm sure. But let's take a look at the actual card. Card number 13 in the tarot is Death. And here we have the woods. This is one of my favorite deviations from a tarot deck. I think it would have been so easy to put death in here, or the skull, or the cemetery, or the headstone or something. But they decided to take it in a really different direction and give us the woods. Now, the woods actually does kind of speak to the idea of death in the tarot, this very cyclical idea of like death and rebirth. Trees and plants die, for example, and rot into the ground so new things can grow from them. So it does feel in many ways very kind of like the death card as our lighting gets dark and spooky. But the woods definitely speaks to other new ideas too. Here we have, again, the sun very high in the sky in our kind of journey of the sun throughout this deck, pouring into the woods. Beautiful light kind of peeking onto these trees. It really looks like there's, clouds in front of this sun, and we're just seeing some rays pouring down. But like, again, some kind of weird decisions, like this side of the tree is illuminated, even though the light source is over here. If our sun is on top, our light would be coming down from this way, but it seems to be illuminated from this side. But again, that's kind of cool and intriguing. It almost makes it look like this light is shining down and bursting out of this area. And that's what's giving us the illumination here. It's giving us some what's called rim lighting, or like backlighting on these trees, making the edge look very bright, but the center of them look a little bit darker. And we also just have some different colored trees, which is kind of neat. If you're familiar with atmospheric perspective, that is the idea of things in the distance in photographs or compositions getting lighter and lighter because there is more atmosphere in the way. We have an inversion of that here. Things that are close to the screen or the view, if you will, are much lighter. And then as things recede into the distance, they get darker. So it gives us a weird, again, kind of inversion of what we're expecting to see. The light is kind of coming from the wrong side. Things that should be getting lighter as they go into the background are actually getting darker. So cool, so successful. And the idea of the woods, just from like a divinatory standpoint or a world building standpoint, it's so cool. For the divinatory meaning of our woods card, I think I'm actually going to go a little bit straightforward on this. There's a single tree here, so I'm going to say, are you seeing the forest or the trees? Kind of going back to that old saying, see the forest for the trees. Are you focusing on one thing or all the things? Are you missing details? Are you taking in the whole? I think you could take that in a lot of cool ways depending on how this card comes up in the reading itself. Just stunning. But let's move on to the next. The Watchtower, up next. Not necessarily a natural object. Obviously, it's man-made, but it does feel very isolated and distant. There is a little bit of that storm card kind of creeping in here. It feels dark. It feels kind of moody. We have this fiery light kind of pouring out of the window, the singular window in our Watchtower. And again, fire in this deck relates to the mind. So the idea that, there's all of this maybe intuition or natural stuff happening on the outside, but that the mind is pouring out in this very specific small space. So cool. This card is more asymmetrical than most. We do have the Watchtower in the center, which is very structured, very centralized, but our background is flowing in a specific way. So is the Watchtower card, apparently. We have these mountains down here. We have the beam of light coming out. So lots of things pulling your eye in different directions, pulling it to different parts of the card. I also just think the Watchtower is a pretty cool pretty cool addition into our fake tarot arcana. A Watchtower can be overbearing and like a prison guard almost. Or a Watchtower could be a way to find something that's hidden because it gives you a high vantage point. It's got a lot of good and bad kind of baked into it, and that's pretty darn cool. This is card number 14, which would be Temperance in the traditional tarot deck. Kind of a cool little nod maybe with like some fire and water being on here, but not so much. But again, I just love that, there's a new system here. There's something new that's happening. The idea of a Watchtower being this late in the game too, late in the game, not in the actual game that you play, but in the deck of cards, makes it feel more oppressive to me. That you've gone on this whole journey, but now you get to the Watchtower and it's an obstacle or it's something in your way. Maybe it's constantly watching you, or this is oppression that you feel. Actually, I like this as a divinatory purpose too. This idea that there's always something watching, or this kind of implied pressure on you all the time. The Watchtower almost doesn't feel like it's something else looking at you. It feels like yourself constantly judging. That kind of interpretation also feels tarot-y to me. Not that it's not the exact thing that you would think of when you see the card, but something just slightly adjacent or a little bit more odd. Beautiful card. Love it coming off the woods. And even the idea that, you're in the woods, but you're being watched is kind of a cool correlation too. And I actually hadn't noticed this until I put these side by side, but we have kind of a continuation of some of these themes from the woods over to the Watchtower. Really neat. That's a cool little mirroring that we haven't seen in some cards. Ooh, and also some actual mirroring with the backgrounds. Gosh, I am so darn impressed with this whole set. They put so much thought and energy into this. It's just beautiful. When I think about cards that should be in a tarot deck but are not, the Gateway comes to mind. The Gateway seems so perfect. It is this arch showing us the moon and, a rising or setting sun, changes in the background. I've recently gotten kind of obsessed with this idea of liminal spaces. If you're not familiar with liminal spaces, they're transitory. The idea of like an edge of a forest, or a gateway, or a doorway, something where you're transitioning from one space to the next. And I think this card is just full of liminal space. We have a moon transitioning with moon phases. We have day turning into night in the background. We have the outside spilling into the inside with this light pouring through and, transitioning through inside to outside. So cool. The Gateway is just full of symbolism as well. Although gateways are not traditionally depicted in tarot, the idea of changing or moving forward, all of that stuff is just really baked into a symbolic way to represent the world. As far as the Gateway goes, in our new tarot deck, I'm going to say this card is all about that transitory liminal space. Either getting through it, because sometimes it can be hard to kind of exist in that odd, pending kind of feeling, or kind of embracing that. How can you take static ideas and be a little bit more fluid with them and kind of embrace the change that happens, or maybe letting new ideas in or old ideas out? Card number 15 is the Devil in the normal tarot deck. And again, I'm really glad that they went in a different direction here. You could have gone for something like the Serpent in this place and made it a much more direct reference. But they gave us this really cool kind of moody card that makes you think a lot and doesn't remind you at all of the Devil. Another super successful one. I don't know how long that's been there, but hello, Light. Welcome aboard. So cool. Another one that I just really, really like. Let's go on to the next. Whew. Coming in at 16, we have the Gallows, one of the more intense images in this set, and another one that feels very monochromatic. Most of this is purple or gales. We do have a little bit of brown with the wood and the rope too. This card could have easily been slotted in at number 13 for Death, but again, I'm glad it wasn't. It gives it a different flavor and a different feel here. This is an odd card to have kind of in the center of the deck, very similar to how Death is an odd card to have kind of at the center, because you think of the Gallows as an ending spot, very literally like a final ending perhaps. But if we read into the color of this card, into the purple, which in this deck is all about dexterity and escape and movement, maybe it's about circumventing fate or getting out of something that's really challenging or difficult. I think just from a straight compositional standpoint, my very favorite thing about the Gallows is that the center of the gallows is completely empty and just filled with color. There's no cloud peeking in the background. There's no extra space. It feels flat and intense and lets you know that this is the subject of our picture. There's nothing else to distract you. There's no way to escape. But then the rest of the image is all about that escape. We see these clouds literally escaping the edge of the card itself. It's full of the color purple, which is all about escape and movement in the game and in the deck itself. And then some cool little nods to composition, like the branch, the holder. Boy, this really shows how little I know about construction. The structural piece of the gallows mirroring the back, the holder of the gallows, if you will. So cool. Card number 16 in the traditional tarot refers to the tower, and we'd have a big life-changing event here. But I think it's more focused on the lightning bolt hitting the tower, that kind of sudden, shocking change, maybe in this case, sudden, shocking escape. For my divinatory interpretation of the gallows, I'm really going to lean into that escape. I'm going to say, circumventing a seemingly impassable situation, clever solutions, really using your brain, even though fire is the brainy card in the set. Not feeling stuck, but kind of weaseling your way out. Super cool, super intense. Absolutely love it. This brings us to the Assassin. This is card number, 17. There we go. What comes after 16? It is 17. The Assassin is kind of interesting. Most of the cards in the deck so far have referred to structures or animals or environmental features. This is, I think, the first card that really relates to a specific person, the assassin, someone who assassinates. Now I'm just kind of curious. I do want to circle back here. Gallows, Gateway, Watchtower, Woods, Mask, Tome, Coin, Crown, River, Inferno, Storm, Mountain, Tortoise, Serpent, Owl, Stag, Dawn. Yeah, nothing that really directly relates to a person as much as this. Now, that also is, I was going to say it's reflected in the composition too, but not really. Most of the images have had one single item with kind of some stuff in the background. But a lot of the more kind of human-y cards in the deck do read like this. The Mask, for example, if we were to bring that one back, we have this very dark background with this intense red and purple, and then our man-made object on top. Same thing with the Crown. Boy, I should have had these ones out. The Crown, again, this very dark background with just some color kind of peeking in. There's definitely a rhythm being established here and a theme. Every time we see these more kind of earthy man-made things, they tend to be depicted in this way, where the natural cards are full of light and full of grace and expansiveness. These cards seem to close themselves in a little bit more. It's kind of cool that this assassin's blade is touching this strip of red. It kind of reads two ways for me. It's almost as if like this is blood coming from the blade a little bit, but more so like this is fabric, like the assassin is going through something, through fabric to skin and, performing a murder most foul. This is not the strongest card compositionally for me. I think the purple, brown, and black in the background looks fine, but it's a little bit samey. I think almost all black would have been a little bit more striking. And the dagger looks fine as well, but not my favorite visual look. Kind of a neat little thing, though, is that we have the coin in the dagger. So that could lead us back to the coin itself as maybe a thematic integration into this card. In what way does the coin lead to an assassination? That takes me to my interpretation of this card, which I'm going to say is jealousy. Others have and you want, so you take it. I think that's really, really cool that coin is in there because, again, it's pulling in these little themes, these little things that you might see from the tarot cards. Like in a normal tarot deck, in the Rider-Waite deck anyway, in the Death card, you have the two towers of the moon with the sun rising behind them depicted in the background. Again, just this cool little thing to help kind of tie these pieces together and make it feel more like a world. Totally cool. Even in a card that I'm not as in love with, there are things that make me go, holy cow, they thought of everything. Like, it's so, so cool. But I think I will move on to the next. Oh, before I go, 17 in a normal tarot deck is the Star. Very little relationship here. The Star is a very hopeful card. The Assassin, not as much. You'll see as we move through these next couple cards that they're kind of embodying people for the first time. So for 18, we have the Wanderer. 18 in the normal tarot deck is the moon. And you definitely kind of get a wandery vibe with the moon. This is a very heavily adjacent kind of meaning, but another one that's pretty cool. The Wanderer also feels very, very much like a traditional hermit card. And I think that's so cool that we have almost literal tarot imagery being brought in, but applied to a very different card in the deck. And I guess 9 times 2 is 18, so there is a little bit of a reference in there to the number 9, which is kind of neat as well. I might be looking too much into that, but if that's true, I appreciate the thought. Here we see a very transitory, again, almost a liminal image. We're moving from a very dark place to a very bright place, perhaps from a very emotional space into a very heady space. I guess water is not emotional in this deck. It is kind of charismatic. So maybe moving from talking a lot to people or being very social into a very inward. Oh my God, this deck is so cool. Going from social to inside into your own thoughts and your own mind. So much thought is put into this. Every time I say like, well, maybe they didn't think it through. No, they totally did. Clearly, they totally did. And the actual Wanderer himself is purple, implying that movement. Purple is all about dexterity and movement in this game, and the Wanderer is moving in these spaces. I could just make that sound all day. It's so cool. This stuff is so neat. We talked about the Wanderer being 18. I think this is just a really powerful image. Composition, Colin, talk about the things. We have dark turning to light in many places in this deck. So we have dark blue going to light orange, going to dark red. So we have kind of dark to light. We have darkness of the trees coming to light down here. So the whole thing feels transitory and movement based. But oh my gosh, the idea of socialness to inwardness in this card, I could just make that noise all day. It's so good. It's like juicy. And with the sun dimming here, I say let's move on to the next card because I could just make that noise at this card all day. If we're treating this deck as a narrative, which I guess I am kind of, this is an interesting move coming from the Wanderer to the Architect. Maybe this is the idea of, going away from society, going into your mind and building. You know what I didn't do is give you guys a divinatory meaning of the Wanderer, which I'm going to say is all about like the hermit, essentially, going inward, really focusing. And the Architect is all about refining your thoughts then, taking that inward time and that inward focus and building something with it. This is a very powerful image. I think it almost takes the ideas of the assassin, but makes it way more successful, at least in my opinion. We have that very strong vertical thrust. We have almost a Masonic looking compass that superimposes this whole thing. We basically have a square in the background too. I hadn't really noticed that, but kind of cool real world symbolism sort of baked into this otherworldly tarot deck. And then some little things like the shadow of the compass coming off, the line of the pencil being drawn. It just feels very much like these items are in a space, obviously on a blueprint in the background here, but it's an abstract space. It's one that you can superimpose onto, whatever you want. I also love that the pencil and this drawn line are meeting at the edge of the card, as if, this whole card was almost being drawn by the Architect himself. And this opening on the side with this white allows us to enter into this space and become the Architect ourselves. So darn neat. And I think I'm going to stick with my guns for what my divinatory meaning is. This is really taking your ideas and wielding them and creating something cool. Oh, so cool. Coming in at number 20, we have the Herald. Here we are back to a very almost traditional tarot card that I can't seem to get straight. Number 20 in the normal tarot deck is Judgment, and it literally shows an angel blowing a trumpet. It feels very much like, this is ripped straight out of a tarot deck and placed in here. If you told me, if you just showed me this card and said, oh, check out this new tarot deck where they, changed the names of some of the major arcana, I'd be like, yeah, this is a super cool Judgment card. But it exists in Weave, not in Tarot. So let's take a look. I love how many little callbacks there are in this card. For example, we have the crown here in the center. We have the mountain behind. We have the gateway. We also have all the colors here. Wait, do we have brown? No brown. Maybe brown on the bottom? No brown. No brown. It doesn't matter though. It's a beautiful image. It feels very heralding. It feels like it's announcing something, like you're either coming in or something's coming out. I really appreciate these cards because they do give you that feeling kind of duality. There is multiple ways to interpret them, which for a storytelling game or something like divination is really important, giving you a little bit to read into because so many contexts could be applied. If we're doing a reading with this deck, if it's about marriage or if it's about someone's job, those are wildly different life experiences. I can't expect to apply the same meaning to every card, just like a tarot deck as well. From a divinatory purpose, I would say that the Herald is all about looking back on your experience and realizing that it's all still with you. The crown is still with you. The gateway is still with you. The mountain is still with you. The river even maybe is still with you. But then also realizing that you have a moment of passing into something new. So it's a transitory period again, but one of reflection and one of seeing that everything is with you. It almost gives me a magician-y vibe in that sense. The magician is often depicted with tools and gives you the idea that all the tools are at your disposal. Super cool. Again, a super cool little nod to a real tarot deck with also being its own different thing. Just love it. Can't say it enough. Just love it. Have I said that I love it? Our last card is Dusk. So beautiful that we begin with dawn and end with dusk. And what a cool way to kind of cyclically incorporate, the idea of a tarot journey into a set of cards. For the dusk, I'm going to interpret this as things coming to a close, rest perhaps, finally ending your journey. Card number 21 is typically the world in a tarot deck, which is kind of this accumulation. I'm almost thinking that's more the Herald in this deck. And this is about just kind of chilling a little bit or realizing that things will always start again. I did want to look at these two cards in tandem though, just to kind of see what compositional choices they decided to make. And it's a lot of them and they're really cool. So some elements are perfectly symmetrical, like the sun. Obviously we have a color difference. The center of the sun is the same color, but we have a lighter and darker object on the outside. The mountains are the exact same, but again, we have the darker color, or the different colors, I should say, for the two mountains that are there. We have some differences in the background, although they are vaguely symmetrical, just a little bit asymmetrical. But then we literally have one item that climbs across the composition. If we were to stack these two up on top of each other, that is one cloud. Like the bottom is the same. We can see the little lumps of the cloud going. That is the perfect symbol of this being a cyclical, transitory kind of experience. So cool. Can I say it again? It's so cool. We have things like the clouds kind of arcing over these two in the background, almost like a rainbow of, style or thought or something. And then obviously the stars in the background kind of mirroring each other too. So cool. I can't even stress how cool I think this is. I wanted to bring these two cards in together because they kind of sit outside of these sets of 4 that this deck lives in. So what I want to do real quick is run you through all the cards again, start to finish. But instead of 1 by 1, I want to go 4 by 4 because there are some very cool little cadences and patterns that begin to form and show themselves when we do that organization. But the dawn and the dusk kind of cap those 2 bits off, or all the bits of 4, I should say. Let's take a look. In our first set of 4, we have animals. So we kick things off with the stag, we go to the owl, the serpent, and then the tortoise. I think it's kind of cool that we have this slight progression from kind of like fire to water, although not directly. But we can definitely see here animals are being depicted. And, as soon as we go to the next set of 4, that changes dramatically. And even the idea that they would go so far as to think of, all these cards in these kind of subsets, again, just speaks to how powerful and cool and how intentional, that's the word I'm looking for, intentional this whole deck is. And if you're going to make a new system of tarot, throw in some cool little Easter eggs like this. Give us these neat little sets of 4. I mostly just want to point them out though, so I'm not going to dwell too long. Let's take a look at the next one. Coming up next, we have natural phenomenon. So we have the mountain, the storm, the inferno, and the river. And maybe phenomenon's not the right word, but big natural things. A mountain is a huge obstacle to overcome. A storm is something that you can't even touch. It's in the air. An inferno is overwhelming and burning. And rivers are obstacles, since the dawn of time. And again, they're huge and they stretch across continents. Again, so cool that we moved from animals, from these very small ideas, to these big natural concepts. So we're still keeping it natural, but instead of looking at the small, we're looking at the big. Next up, we have our first look at man-made objects, which is kind of interesting. We are, 9 cards deep, and we haven't seen anything man-made yet. But here we have the crown, the coin, the tome, and the mask. So we have almost like symbols of like power or knowledge, and then more personal symbols like a mask or a coin. I don't know that there's a ton to read into that. There probably is, given how much thought was into everything else. Also kind of compositionally, we have a lot of up and down here, which is very cool. We also have 2 very blue cards and 2 very red cards. So a neat little kind of unfolding and composition there. I do love, though, that it took us so long into the deck to get to something more man-made. I think that very natural flavor gives this deck a very different vibe and a very unique voice that tarot doesn't have. And tarot has an amazing voice too, obviously. I talk for literal hours about it on this channel all the time. But I appreciate that this took it in a very different direction. This set feels the least cohesive to me. It's been very easy to kind of pick up on what the other ones were trying to do, but the Woods, the Watchtower, the Gateway, and the Gallows is an interesting set of cards. Part of them feel very transitory or liminal. I use that word several times. The Woods, you're kind of entering the woods here. The Gateway, you're obviously going through. I read into the Gallows a lot as being kind of circumventing death or kind of escaping it. And I suppose a Watchtower could be the idea of maybe escaping as well. Maybe escaping into the woods, escaping from the Watchtower, escaping through a gateway, escaping the Gallows. Fine, I'm going to roll with that. The idea of escape or circumventing or transitioning is kind of a set here. But again, I feel like this one's a little bit more reaching. Probably if they said what this set was, I'd be like, oh, that's genius. Like, there's been a lot of really cool stuff built into these cards. But for now, we guess. Last but certainly not least, we have our adventurers, or perhaps our jobs or our classes. The assassin, the wanderer, the architect, the herald. These are not specific people, but they are specific kind of archetypes of how you might envision a person. And if you're familiar at all with Dungeons and Dragons or role-playing games in general, these are not really traditional archetypes. The assassin is the closest one, but the idea of a wanderer or an architect or a herald, you don't normally see that. And I think that really speaks to this game's philosophy as a storytelling game. It's not trying to do the normal things. I mean, obviously, if you've played other storytelling games just from its presentation, but also from a narrative perspective. These are very non-combat driven, which many of these styles of games are. And an assassin kind of is, but like in a very sneaky espionage-y style way. So, just cannot say enough good things. If you're just interested in games in general, I highly recommend Weave. I think it's super cool. Or if you're looking for a very cool collection of art, or maybe even something to use as an oracle deck, this could be a cool choice. I'm going to grab all the rest of the cards and we'll do some final wrap-up thoughts. As the first part of our wrap-up here, I wanted to give you guys a reading using Weave cards. So using some of those meanings that we ascribed earlier, what is a challenge that we could overcome using Weave? So we have the Wanderer, we have the Coin, and we have the Tome. Okay, cool. Get these guys nice and in center frame. So the Wanderer was all that kind of transition, coming from people, coming from being social, going towards, or going more towards like into the mind. The coin, I'm kind of forgetting now. I think this was just talking about like actual stuff, like yeah, having things, maybe even having money. That's kind of interesting. And then the tome is about like all these ideas on the outside, but finding them in physical objects. Okay, so we're going from a space. I would say the lesson here is to look inward. Don't focus on other people, focus more internally on yourself. Find things that really speak to you that you want to learn from, whether they be books or awesome decks of playing cards or things like that. And then study those objects to see what kind of information that is outside of you that you can bring inside of you. That's pretty cool. You can read weave cards like you could read tarot cards. Such a neat thing. All right. If you are looking for weave, Monocle Society creates it. They are currently working on a bunch of really cool augmented reality stuff. I'm not 100% sure what all that entails, but I'm very excited to see it. They have a very neat Instagram page to go along with all this as well. And I just can't recommend them enough from a game designer perspective. This is not only an extremely cool tarot adjacent thing, but it's also a very, very fun game. I have not had this much fun just kind of laughing and being silly in a long, long time. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and I hope this was cool. Obviously not directly tarot related, but I'd say very closely adjacent to tarot. It is outside of the box, but pressed right up against it. Until the next time, guys, I hope you've enjoyed, and I will see you around.